All right. Nick, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
A pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Do you want to start by telling us a little bit about the early days of the business? And I know it's grown quickly in the last few years, but do you want to just go back a few years and tell us about the early days and how it all started?
Yeah, let me just rewind. It's been a long time, but a short time as well. I've lived kind of dog years, I suppose you could say. But yeah, Linktree was born out of an agency. So my co-founders, Alex and Anthony, we've been working together for the better part of almost a decade, maybe longer. And that working relationship started in independent record labels where I was sort of the in-house designer. That then grew into a digital marketing agency. We were servicing all the festivals around Australia, doing data strategy, audience segmentation, helping them craft a brand and reduce ad spend, but build a brand that they can really target and communicate to this audience, this rather small audience we have for music. But yeah, that agency was going crazy, scaling like all hell. And then we thought we'd try our hand at building digital products that supplement, also add on to our agency offering. One of those tools was a little thing called Linktree. Alex comes in after a meeting with like a harebrained idea. We had hundreds of clients on the go at any moment. And we were trafficking sort of ads across all of their socials. And this monotonous behavior of every day having to swap out this link in bio was do that 10 times, 100 times a week. It can be kind of infuriating. Alex rubbed over his, what if we just make this thing that links other links? And this would be how it could function. 6 hours later, we had a prototype. And the rest is kind of history. I think it's a long piece of string, but yeah, that's the genesis of Linktree.
And it was that simple. It was like, here's the idea, and you built it straight away. So within a few hours, within a day, you've got this product. And how quickly after you had the product did you go, actually, we've really got something here? Or did you know straight away? Or was it, there's always that, you've come up with something you think is going to work, but then there's the proof in the pudding type thing. So how long after you built that first phase did you go, oh, hang on, we really have something?
Yeah, this answer, I don't know how impressive this answer is. We honestly didn't realize like what we had built. And I think that's not because we were ignorant. I think at the time, like I said, this agency that we were building, we started with one employee and then another, and every single step was like this incremental milestone. We get this new client, we can hire this new person. So we weren't paying ourselves as well, by the way. So everything was just like focusing on building this fledgling agency and getting it on its feet. And every sort of dollar in meant another step towards this sort of milestone. So frankly, we built this little Linktree thing in a matter of hours. We're like, great, this is a little tool that we can sell to our clients, make our lives and their lives better. But we basically shipped it, gave it to a bunch of clients, and then just went back to focusing on the agency. All right, who have we got to hire? I've got to go clean the toilets later. We need to, figure out like employment contracts. Like it was just every single hat we were wearing all at once. So I don't think we weren't so deep in the detail, but very surely, after a number of weeks sort of giving it to these clients. So we're talking Flume, I think was one of the first signups, like it's a musician you may be aware of. Coachella, randomly, we were working to some digital audience strategy for them, gave that to them, gave it to Splendor in the Grass, a whole bunch of these clients, and they were sort of loving this thing. But yeah, again, at the time, we were just like hanging on for dear life as the agency just scaled out from under us.
Yeah. So you've come up with this great, what you think is a product, not realizing you've got a business. And effectively $1 billion business. So how does that transition go? And how many days, weeks, months did it take to go from get a product, yeah, this product is doing really well and people love it, to hang on, we've got a business. This is the focus now.
Yeah, I suppose maybe it was so we did this 6 hour, like back of the napkin prototype. I was sat next to Mike, one of our developers, still with us to this day, beautiful man. So we sat there figuring this thing out. We sketched something like really awful. I've got the initial sketches. I'm quite embarrassed by them. But in truth, the sort of those initial sketches, you can still see the echoes of those design paradigms today, which I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. Who knows? Anyway, 2 weeks, we decided let's spend 2 weeks, get this thing prototyped. So we need a brand, content. Like, how do we position this thing? It was all really centered around just this solution for Instagram, shipped it to the world, and we put it on, somebody found us on Product Hunt, which is this sort of like emerging products. That's where people are touting all of their wares. And we just saw this massive inflection point. So I suppose we realized after about a month, we had Alicia Keys sign up, and we were like furiously checking if this was actually real or just somebody sort of spamming us. Found out it was, recognized that it was this entire music agency wanting to like port all over their entire roster. So I think pretty quickly we were like, okay, this could be something really big. But I think the beauty of it was just to solve this problem really simply. So there was this like lovely organic nature to, okay, let's just solve this problem. not overthink it, not try and open and manipulate it and trying to make it something that it wasn't. We just let it organically float for about 12 months, which is probably not good advice, to be honest. I wish we focused on it a little bit earlier. But yeah, next minute, 12-month happens. We were slowly, incrementally building it and improving it. And we had about 1 million users. And because of our background in music, being in the beer soak sort of music scene, we had no sense of, was 1 million users a lot? Was this a viable business? So yeah, probably a year and we're like, okay, it's time to commit and put some money where our mouth is.
Yeah. Okay. So what year did the business start effectively?
Yeah, 2016, April 2016.
Okay.
We created Linktree.
Fast forward 7 years, is now a business worth more than $1 billion, and you've raised a lot of money. Is that public information, the amounts you've raised through VCs and that sort of stuff?
Yeah, it's pretty astounding. It's north of 110, 120 million US dollars, which I still struggle to grapple with.
Yeah. So 7 years ago, you've come up with this product, and now you've got a business worth over $1 billion. You've raised over $100 million. At what point during that journey did you think this is where we're going to be? Or has this just been a surprise in terms of how quickly things have grown?
I mean, I'm always maybe not surprised. I'm more thankful and kind of amazed. I never really had a sense of where my life was going. I'm just happy to be here. It's like the baseline. I'm just the puppy dog, happy to be around. I guess there was just this organic sense of like constantly wanting to continue to chase, to solve the problem, to have deliver some level of impact to the world. I'm the more idealistic of the three founders. Not to say Alex and Anthony aren't, but I'm definitely the more sort of hippie one. But it was really sort of astounding, like the impact that we were having, millions of people using this tool. And if we're making their life a fraction better, we're saving them 5 minutes of time, times that by 8, 10, 30 million. That's the most astounding thing to me. So I guess I'm more proud of that. I never really stopped to think, okay, in 5 years' time, I want to have this and I want to be here. It's more about I want to continue to deliver that impact. And just, it's also really fun to work with these two Italian brothers that I met 12 years ago. And I'm more thankful that our working relationship has continued to become stronger. And we have this like lovely intersection of the Venn diagram. We all sort of complement and overlap in really nice ways. So yeah, I don't know. I didn't really sat down and had a 5-year plan. It was kind of live to fight another day, continue to stay true to the mission. And it was never something, I just thought that was way too hard. But then I met Alex and he's a few years younger than I am. And I remember meeting this kid going like, there's no permission. He just didn't ask for permission. He just did it. He wanted to go and tour Europe. So he was managing these two DJs at the time. And he just figured out how to run a European tour. So all expenses paid, got these two guys playing gigs in like amazing places. And I was sort of astounded that he didn't need that permission. He was just so confident. So I guess like working with him and seeing that there are no barriers, I kind of started, this reluctant entrepreneur started to realize like it is actually attainable. You just have this sense that it's so incredibly difficult to like get started. But Alex has this, to his credit, like this fearlessness, and there's no glaring or barrier. He's just, well, I'm just going to keep pushing until I get through. Yeah, for me now, I guess I find I'm an entrepreneur, but I still sort of pitch myself as to where I've landed.
Yeah, it's an interesting journey, right? Now you talk about your co-founders; they're brothers, right?
Yep, Italian, beautiful brothers.
Yeah, and I'm also Italian. I've got brothers, so I know how drill works. I'm interested in how that goes from your perspective as the non-brother founder in the group.
It's an interesting one. I always say that marinara sauce is thicker than blood. Like the Italian bond is just so incredibly strong. But something that's really what's worked in my favor is I've felt integrated into that family very early on. So 10 years ago, 11 years ago, when I started working with them, I was invited around to their house and I just felt like part of furniture. They're incredibly welcoming. And I've got this question a lot where people are like, you've got two brothers, you're always outvoted. But what's actually happened is we have such high alignment. We definitely have disagreements and sort of opinions, but it's always task conflict, never relationship conflict. And I've never at once felt like ganging up. So I sort of see myself as almost the mediator, like the piece of white bread between the two meatballs is the analogy that I've used before. Yeah. And so far, so good. It's just been the most fulfilling, enriching relationship of my life. Is quite sentimental.
I think people might be making some assumptions there about being outvoted by the two brothers. I think, again, knowing what Italian brothers are like, I don't imagine they necessarily always see eye to eye on stuff. So I don't think the voting stuff's a foregone conclusion. Yeah,
I've definitely been more of a mediator. And I think that I sit somewhere between the eternal and past, so I can see both sides and then I can help be that communicative bridge. But a lot of the times we have where we may disagree in sort of certain areas, we have like really high alignment on where we're going. And it's never been a question of like ulterior motives or Alex wants something that I don't. It's always, I don't know, we're just so lucky that naturally we're sort of oriented in the same direction. So yeah, I thank my lucky stars.
A disagreement doesn't necessarily matter, does it? In terms of those robust conversations, even sometimes arguments within family or within business, as long as, like you say, everyone's got the same, all aligned in where they're trying to get to, those things are healthy in terms of trying to get to the bottom of an issue or work out where you're going to go, whatever it might be. That's not necessarily, there's differences between healthy conflict and unhealthy conflict, right?
Yeah, I definitely, it's similar advice to never let the sun set on an argument in your relationship. I think a business relationship is exactly akin to a marriage in many ways. If you're not working on that relationship, if you're not trying to be empathetic point of view or just, be really committed to making this marriage work, because you're spending almost more time with these people than your partner in many ways. You're often facing way more challenges and sort of a frequency of difficult challenges with your working partners than your relationship. Hopefully if homes pass, we could really go head to head and have these like very heartfelt and intense debates and maybe come out of it quite flustered. But that meeting ends and we would be joking 10 minutes later. And I think that's like super important to just recognize that you're in this for the long haul. And it's really important to that relationship and make sure that it's healthy on both sides.
So that stuff, if you're all pulling in the same direction, there's no agendas. It's really just, it's not personal, it's business. It's just trying to get to the right solution, right? And work out the best solution you can. In terms of your leadership style or your role in that business from start till now, what was the curves? No doubt there's been a few different learning curves along the way with the rapid growth you've had. But what's been the biggest learning curve for you?
Yeah, for me, I mean, from my perspective, Alex and Epi, I'm sure have different sort of learning arcs. For me, a tricky one. I've thought about this. Sometimes it's scaling so quickly, you don't really know what you've learned until you stop to reflect. And it's very rare you have that time.
You don't get a chance, right?
Yeah, not often. I think I have relatively good pattern recognition where I can get a sense. I think this is something that you tend to develop in a production role. So I'm a designer by trade. I used to do the end-to-end production of started in print, then into web and content and all these sorts of things. So I sort of understand the individual steps of producing work and knowing how long things take or how difficult it is to like align people and what are those sort of crucial structures that you need to align a team. So I think in the early days, the biggest learning curve, or maybe it's a mistake that I felt I encountered as we rapidly scaled. I don't think we had a lot of these like fundamental structures in place to help the team scale and understand exactly what we're building. So it's classic things like guiding principles, clarity vision, it's really, really tangible and clear artifacts. So a new person this week can get really quickly up to speed, understand the context and sort of like build this thing. Instead, what we did was we scaled so quickly, hiring 10 or 15 people a week. And there was sort of this like positive sense that self-organization would just happen and an equilibrium would just occur. Not exactly what happened. And I guess the biggest learning curve was there are just certain things fundamentally you should have in place before you scale or before you bring anyone into the business. Make sure like they're able to build within that vision. Yeah, that was a hard lesson.
Is that something that you could have known ahead of time, or do you have to experience that first?
Yeah, it's funny. You kind of get the same repeat advice over and over again. Get your vision really clear, get some guiding principles. And to an extent, you question the real value of this. It's like a lot of time that you're spending not on the business, but sort of sitting in this higher, more theoretical, ethereal layer. You're not giving people absolute clarity on build this thing, build it in this way. Here's all the context you need. You're trying to sort of like distill and communicate this whole grand vision into like a single sentence. It's actually some of the most difficult work. And I think we spent months of the project trying to clarify what exactly it is we're building, struggling, getting frustrated and just going, all right, we're going back to just being, in the details. And to this day, it evolves every few years where, you're still heading in the general direction, but market factors change, team composition changes, where Linktree sits and all of the sort of orbit around that changes. So we're having to constantly reshape, reorient, and re-clarify the vision. But yeah, to answer your question fully, I think there's a little element of maybe listening to the advice, but also knowing that, it's sage advice, but it's also, I think, us seeing how it didn't work really clarified to then. It's a tricky one, man. It was a was a wild couple of years.
Yeah, some of that stuff is like you can see the advice, but until you live it, it doesn't make as much sense, right? And then suddenly, oh, okay, now I get it, type of thing. It's like that with a lot of things. Until you actually experience it, you can hear the advice, but it doesn't mean the same until you've gone through whatever it was that advice was intended for. But what was that like going from starting a business rapidly? Firstly, I guess asking yourselves, at what point do you need capital to come into the business? Or even do you need capital? So that's the first thing, because no doubt at a certain point, people are starting to knock on your door if you're not knocking on theirs. It's trying to work through that process and work out who you should work with, who not to work, because that's a big decision, right? And especially when you're dealing in tens or hundreds of millions of dollars from a cap raise. What was that process like?
Yeah, it was an interesting time. I suppose because of our background in music, we really weren't immersed in the tech world. So we would go to music conferences, we would speak to music clients, we would build products specifically for our music audiences. Alex definitely had this urge to create some kind of digital products, but it was generally music focused. So, and because we were sort of centered in Australia, we didn't really look out into the realm of VC. And we'd always been bootstrapped since day one. So we've never taken a loan, never had any sort of loans from our parents. It was always just whatever was in our pockets, and focusing on like incrementally building a business. So that bootstrap mindset was, we scaled this agency to like 30 or 40 people at the time from just our small meager life savings. So we had seen that we were capable of building a sustainable business just through like sweat and grit. But what happened sort of a few years or maybe 2 years in, Linktree was pretty significant, a few million users. And also we had so much traffic. There's an Alexa ranking, which sort of maps highest visited website. We were sort of climbing that pretty significantly, like the charts.
People are seeing this, right?
Yeah. So you've got, VCs around the world monitoring sort of certain areas, definitely one of those places. And they were seeing Linktree sort of climbing the ranks. And so, yeah, we started to get phone calls and it was mostly felt like tire kicking for the big, VC firms that I had never heard of, Nora and Alex. We're like, what is this whole VC thing? Like, do we even need capital? What would we even spend the money on? Coming from a bootstrap mindset where you earn money and then you make an incremental step towards another milestone. It's like having all of this money. How would you even prioritize what to spend it on? So yeah, early on it was tire kicking, people sort of wanting to understand what our vision of the product was, just to see if like these, three knuckleheads in Melbourne had a brain between them. And so, yeah, then 2020 comes around and we got we're getting a lot of people requesting time with us. And Alex was like, let's just go, we'll talk some VCs in Australia, let's fly to America and just sort of see, like we're going to come home with hundreds of millions. It was really just to see, what the vibe was, talk to these people, understand what the relationship might look like. And then, yeah, so that was March 2020, Alex and I on a plane. There was the cough going around the world.
I was going to say, this is COVID just starting, right?
We weren't the last plane. We were the second last plane to leave the state. So it was a bit of a risk to go, but we just thought it seems pretty cool. Got a bunch of advice for people. They're like, you're crazy not to go. Just go and see what can happen. Flew over there. First discussions were, kind of astounding in my mind. They were sort of talking about valuations and I never really imagined this world. And then it started to become, okay, who is the right strategic partner? There seemed to be a lot of money that we could have accessed, but it was really about finding the right people that understood what we were building and could kind of give up the greatest strategic leverage and advice. So that's kind of the beginning of the BC story. It's quite a long one, but yeah.
How was that from the perspective of it's just the three of you at that point, I assume? And now you're raising money and you've got it changes the whole way you go about things in some respects, right? But how did that impact your mindset and the way you go about business, or did it? Did you say, we just want to keep doing what we're doing, or how did that impact you, having that responsibility?
Yeah, so at the time we had around 9 employees at Linktree. Some were sort of split across, half on the agency, half on Linktree, a few full-timers. And at the time we were receiving significant scale. So our AWS servers were getting, our fees were getting super expensive. So there was sort of a pivotal moment actually where Linktree was costing us essentially any profit that we had coming in was going out the door the next day. So it was actually becoming quite expensive to run. So there was a choice: do we shut it down? Is this thing a viable business? Should we keep, investing in it? Do we go get a bank loan? And even sort of stepping towards that, trying to get a loan in Australia and convince the banks, that just seemed harder. So it's starting to apply overseas. We started to sort of imagine what like we investment to sort of fuel, get us closer to the vision faster. And then we started to like peer our heads into this new world of VC and tech and starting to meet other founders just to get a sense of, okay, what changes, how did investment sort of transform your business? A lot of them was obviously amazing, but just the doors, the strategic doors that the investors could open. You get connected to the CEO of Figma, no worries. That level of access was kind of unbelievable. And that was what excited us most. I think the money coming in, we assumed the vision would take us X amount to execute. We had to big speeches and build all these like foundational structures. It just sort of like reduced the time scale in which we could actually achieve that. So I guess for founders that are patient, it just felt like a fuel injection to get to the future faster. So I think like it was pretty quick for us to move from this bootstrap mindset into, okay, how do we sort of strategically use this money wisely? What actually happened is we probably got a little bit too excited and tried to do everything all at once in every direction. And that's a lesson we learned, to be more sort of thoughtful and really sequence out how we're spending, where we're spending, who we're hiring. But yeah, unfortunately, we learned that lesson none of the hard ways.
I was going to say, that's probably easy to say in hindsight, but it's one of those things where in the last 3 years have probably straddled over a year and a half of tech boom and a year and a half of tech struggled a little bit more. So it's a different mindset, right? So that path of the last 3 years has changed the way tech businesses build in many respects, or they're different a year and a half ago to now. So that's part of the learning curve, I guess. In terms of your strengths and weaknesses, what would you say that your strengths and or weaknesses are?
Yeah, I don't know if this is going to be sage advice or helpful, but I'm quite self-reflective, maybe to a fault. I think my biggest strength is also my weakness, which might be like a cliche answer, but I really do believe it. So as a designer, I think you're just inherently empathetic because you're designing something for somebody else to either act an action or to an audience, trying to imagine how are they going to receive this? How do I design this flow so they can simply move through this product, all these sorts of things. So you're constantly always thinking about the person you're building for. Not to say others don't, but designers are intrinsically empathetic, I believe. And because I'm able to really deeply understand the customer and the problem and sort of advocate for them, celebrate them, bring their sort of perspectives and voices into the rooms where we're getting a little caught up and excited over this feature, I'll try and remind the team what the problem is that we're trying to solve, and also advocating for just simplicity within the product development process. But on the negative side, I think the empathy, if you don't channel it in the right way, it can be a lot of weight to carry. And it can also mean you're rather indecisive. So sometimes because I can see both sides of an argument, I find it difficult to have a really distinct opinion. I have a preference, but because I can sort of see both sides, I can sometimes feel a little bit wishy-washy and on the fence. I'm still trying to perfect that. And then the other downside of empathy can be the emotional toil and strain that it can take. To work in a business with, as a rapidly dynamically shifting business, scaling and then, making reductions in the team, having to wear that and sort of be the business-minded person, but also recognizing the impact it has when, you make a reduction in the team, how that person must feel. So yeah, it's an interesting one. I'm trying to fine tune how to use this for good.
And that's easier said than done, right? Because some of that stuff does where you've got the business decisions that have to be made versus being human and understanding people, that sort of stuff. So I can see that would be from time to time quite confronting, where you've got to look at those things but you still have to make the business decision at the end of the day, but you can handle it in a different way because sometimes people can be ruthless in that way, but you can also handle it in a more empathetic way.
I definitely use that as a power I'll even, go and talk to the team. Exit interviews are some of the greatest resources for me. Well, it can be seen as kind of a negative sentiment. I actually really love to understand, where did this go wrong, or how can we have done a better job? And then really taking that insight and applying it to how do we onboard the next 100 people? How do we make this business more empathetic to the needs? How do you find that balance between being a human, being a business person? I think those two things can coexist, but you really need that feedback and iterating the sort of process as you go. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's something you get better at, I think, as you get more and more experience and as you get older. I think those things, once you things a few times, then it starts to become not simpler, is probably the wrong word. You've better versed in seeing how it plays out. And if you handle things differently next time, then you've got that next time and so on and so forth. It's one of those sorts of things, I think. In terms of advice that you've been given along the way, what's the best advice you'd say you've been given, Nick, along the way?
Yeah, this may be sentimental and a little naff, but very early on in my life, my grandfather gave me this. I'm not sure how robust this framework is, but he would always talk about the too hard basket. And I didn't really know what that meant for a little while, but I always sort of repeat it whenever I'd come to him and he'd ask me what I was struggling with at school. It's like, this is hard. Or when I'm sort of in the first few years of the business, really struggling with just like how much time I was spending. And yeah, he basically presented this framework of there's certain things that you just cannot control and you only have so much bandwidth to sort of spend. And yeah, it's very decisive in how you spend your energy and attention. And there's just some things that you really can't control. So yeah, ultimately it's about me understanding what my locus of control is, and just not pushing against immovable objects. And if somebody didn't see the world the way that I saw it, just like not trying to spin my wheels, trying to change them. And yeah, so it was interesting. I'm sure there's like a more business savvy way of saying it, but too hard basket, all the things in there. He never gave me the follow up, which is what do I do when it gets full? But he passed away before I could get the answer, so that's fine.
So he's used the words too hard basket. You've reinterpreted that, I'm guessing, it to be about what you can and can't control. Is that what the words control? Or did he just say, put that in a too hard basket? But you've interpreted that to be, that really is about when you can't control it, it goes in there because I can't do anything about it. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, it's honestly just, so much time that you can spend, so much energy and effort. And there's things that sort of like you spend your energy and it's a virtuous cycle. You're spending the energy and you're actually gaining traction and impact. And then there's other things like trying to convince somebody to see the world in another way, or trying to change broader structures or whatever it is. You can spend a lot of your energy pushing against these immovable objects and exhausting yourself, and you burn yourself out. So it's really just about being mindful of, there's certain things I can immediately control, and anything else that I can't, I can do my best to sort of shape it, but I'm not just going to throw good energy after bad. So yeah, it's a bit of a fluffy kind of thought, but
no, it makes sense. And I think it's probably more prevalent in sports psychology, actually, because if you ever listen to athletes talk after something, they would have been having bad games or they've been in bad form, but they snap out of it or whatever it might be. And it's you had a great game today. And how did you do that? And they'll just say something along the lines of, look, and they've obviously sat down with the sports psychologist around how they're being coached on that side. And they've said, I just worry about what I can control and nothing else matters. So I just do the things that matter that I can control, and then anything else that falls outside of that, about it. So what the media say, what happens here, whether I'm kicking straight or whatever it might be, whatever the thought. But I think that's where that sort of is more prevalent rather than in business. But I think it easily transfers across. But
interesting you mentioned that. Just because something that I was never prepared for was Linktree, the success story, this fledgling business coming out of Melbourne, and then you hit sort of a level of success and notoriety, and then sometimes you'll see press that maybe isn't as positive as it once was, more critical. And I think that was where I really utilized this too hard basket. I was like, I can't control how people perceive or what story they want to tell. I know what's true, and sort of I focus on what I can control within the business. And I think those things, if you can just sort of like focus your aperture to the things, it's way easier than carrying all this sort of negative baggage. That's the vibe.
100%. A lot of times, sport is an easier analogy to look at in how to approach things in life or even business, and it does transfer across. Some of those simple type things that make sense there, and you can use it for exactly that same thing. I mean, you got that classic tall poppy syndrome in Australia. We all want everyone to do well, but don't go too well because then we want to drag you down a little bit. And that's what happens, right? It happens in the media. It happens with people in the industry, all those sorts of things. But you can only do what you can do and get on with it. And if you're going to let yourself worry about what they're all saying, you're never going to get anywhere.
Absolutely.
What about business people that you admire? Who comes to mind, either or in overseas?
I don't have one. I think it's not. I'm not saying it's a fool's errand to sort of like idolize one person. I do think individuals can be tricky to follow and sort of use them as this oracle sort of thing. But I am obviously Steve Jobs from a design perspective, the way that he leveraged design and viewed the value and sort of like turn the ship or as the ship to be more design oriented. So I think like there's certain things that leaders have done that I admire, but I think idling individuals or saying this person has it covered, I think that's kind of tricky or a bit of a challenge. But this may be incredibly naff and cliche, but I'm actually inspired by anybody doing any kind of business, going out on their own, taking some sense of a risk. doing things independently. I actually get motivated just by speaking to the local vintage store, and there's a woman in there sort of starting this little journey. I got the shop, and I started to build a brand about expanding, or the guy who has like a sandwich shop is thinking about expanding. I actually get so motivated, and yes, it's super cliche to say it, but I'm constantly being exposed to Linktree users that, they've had this little dream and they've acted upon it. And I think the bravery that takes, and I'm learning from them every day. These like tiny brand new fledgling companies that are figuring out content strategy, and they're gaining hundreds of thousands of followers and building these businesses back. So yeah, sometimes I look at the big dogs, but I also get sort of motivated and pushed along by just people chasing a dream and taking the risk. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I don't think that's cliche at all. And I don't think people think of things along that line probably enough. I mean, anywhere you look at, what you're talking about is you admire people that have a go. And you've got to respect that. It's easy for people, well, not easy. It's easy for people to admire the people who are successful, because that's sort of like low-hanging fruit in terms of looking at, well, they've done it well. But there's all sorts of nuance that goes into these guys at a point. But you don't know where they came from, right? They might have come from a really tough background, and having their own little business where they employ 5 people is actually like, they're the first, because everyone else in their family were alcoholics and unemployed. Or, and they've actually excelled, and they've created something. The nuance to that sort of thing, I think, is really worthwhile and is actually really interesting. So I wouldn't say it's cliche at all.
Yeah, I think just ideas are very cheap. It's really easy to generate a bunch of ideas. I think acting upon them is a different thing, and it takes a different muscle, resilience and grit, and sort of trust in yourself. And there's this, like, I can't remember the exact framework, but there's a bell curve of effort. It feels really, really easy at the start. But great, here's the logo, we're going to sort of do this thing. And then you get into the really, really hard depths, and you can only really draw upon your own instinct and will to push through. And I think people that have made it through that sort of path and onto the other side, like, I just find that it's incredible. I share a kindred spirit. It's not easy unless you have some unending bank account you can draw upon. The people, for most of us, like being able to through it and start this idea and foster a business into life. I just think that's something quite astounding and it's something we should be celebrated to do it. So.
Yeah, I think that goes back to the core of being Australian, right? Because that's the Aussie battler that you're describing, really, in some respects. Business books. Do you ever read business books? Would you say that you were entrepreneurial in any way when you were younger? Is that, or were you just more creative?
I think I am always fascinated with sort of psychology, or there's something about designing something to create an action. So whether it's like a poster on the street, I always found it quite powerful to be able to design a bunch of stuff, text, letters, photography, to communicate a message to someone I would never meet and never get. It's like a puzzle that you're building, and I find that really satisfying. So I started designing posters for gigs, and okay, I'm driving past this poster at speed. I've designed a terrible poster. No one could read this because I was too focused on like the little details.
Yeah, right.
So I was always like really trying to understand, I have this message I need to send. I have an audience today that needs to receive it, how to sort of communicate. It was never about wanting to start my own business. It was always wanting to like understand, how do I communicate messages? So I was often less entrepreneurial, more interested in understanding the mechanics of the mind, understanding advertising. I was always so drawn to those compelling ads. And you're like, that is just so transfixing. And it's not even about buying a product. It's about, so anything I was consuming was sort of to that end. And in terms of the business books now, and that's like 95% of the consumption, non-fiction for me. Sorry, yes, business books are non-fiction. But I sort of dabbled between trying to understand, business teams, building cultures, but also trying to understand just the world at large. So I might read something by Simon Sinek one week, and something about, the book? There's Legacy by James Kerr, which is actually, it's about the All Blacks team. It's incredible for sort of principles and team culture, and just sort of, it's like business, but kind of adjacent through sport. But then I'll also read a book that comes to mind, it's Your Profile, which is more about the psychology of, it's about profile building, which to my world, I would imagine. Linktrees are essentially this intersection of your sort of all the slivers of yourself, all the little shades of yourself across the internet. Linktrees where it's like unified. And this book that I've read is really about, you're crafting a profile of how you want the world to interact and how you want the world to see you. So I sort of move along the spectrum between business books that I can apply tomorrow, and also just trying to understand human condition and psychology, all that sort of stuff. A bit of a weird bookshelf, I think.
Yeah, but that human condition and psychology is at the core of business and what makes it all tick, right?
Yeah.
That's the thing that people forget, because often people have a business mindset, But that where you come from in terms of wanting to get into how the mind ticks and what solving this problem and what makes it work. Well, that's actually right at the core of, what makes everything work. You look at someone like Johnny Ives or somebody like that from Apple, from a design perspective, those guys are really getting into the ins and outs of that sort of stuff. And that's what makes it work in the end.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any particular, before we wrap up, any particular quotes or mantras or things that you might live by that have held you in good stead?
I don't really have any quotes. You know what, though? I found myself wanting or longing to have more and more sort of quotes around me. So I don't have any like off the top of my head, but I've found I want to have these like physical artifacts to just remind me, put me into this mindset. Nothing really outside of, there's a quote by Walt Whitman, an American poet. And again, I haven't read much of his work, but this notion of I contain multitudes was a big sort of unlocking point for Linktree. When we created this thing, didn't really know what it was or how to describe it. But now that it's evolved, it's sort of become a little mantra that I say to myself, where Linktree sort of allows you to, present your entire self. So I'm just constantly thinking about how do I represent that in the product? How do I help somebody within the product compile this like whole self, this holistic vision of who I am? Because on Instagram, I'm one, LinkedIn, I'm another. Linktree is a place where you can sort of be that whole self. So yeah, it's more of like something that I practically apply, but there's nothing that I sit and ponder and read from a business quote. So yeah, sorry, that's not the most satisfying answer, but I'm probably not the most like atypical, business guy.
No, that's perfectly fine. I mean, all of your insights are interesting, and so that's totally fine. What's next for you guys, for Linktree, and for you? What's next?
I'm not great at predicting the future. I'm not sure many humans are. So I think there's some things that I can predict, which is, more of the same, really trying to get that impact that I desperately want. I often do just little calculations in my head. If we make, we have 35, 40 million users. If I can get like just 1 percentage point better in some degree, saving them time, making them feel more empowered, that's what drives me. That's why I get up out of bed every morning and go, we're actually shipping tangible value to millions of people I'll never see. So understanding how do we solve more of those problems. But for the business, I think probably the last few years at rapid scale, sort of missing some of those like foundational structures of clarity of what we're exactly building, onboarding the team and making sure that they know what they're here to do and what good looks like. I think we're sort of focusing on that. But it's really about clarifying to the team what are the expectations, exactly what a Linktree is, and defining that and providing principles so people can filter decisions through it. I think historically, a lot of the context lived within my head or Alex's head or Anthony's head. And that's just really challenging when you're scaling a team and people don't have the answers and you can't scale yourself. I think now we sort of learned that pain. So a big part of it is like, this is sort of the new clarity era. And then, more of the same, just like scaling the business, not so much in terms of headcount, but just really scaling our offering. We're doing a lot of foundational work in the background that's not super visible from a product perspective, but one of the best parts of being able to scale that we did was to focus on some of the bigger initiatives, such as like trust and safety and moderation. Because of Linktree's traffic, we sort of have a lot of scrutiny from, governments and platforms. So it's great that we've been able to build a very safe and compliant product. So now on this foundation, it's keep more of the same, really, just have a good time and be good to people. Yeah.
Get bigger, growing headcount.
I think so. Yeah. Being very strategic with how sort of sequencing the work, and the prioritization thing is like probably the biggest challenge for most businesses, and really looking for new people to come into the team to help us really be super with our prioritization as well. So yeah, lots of fun stuff. I'm excited.
I'm really excited to see where you guys go in the next few years. It's been a rapid growth story and it's fascinating. So good luck with the years ahead.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks very much, mate.